Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield done. Now the long walk back to the lodge. 3:55 a.m., just signed in. Santanoni Range, let's go. The wind is whipping here in the Seward Range today. Just finished the Macomb slide and my legs are on fire. Well, I fell victim to the floating logs again. Made it to the top of East Dix. Peak number 3 of 5 for today here in the Dix Range. Avalanche Pass. On top of Rocky Peak Bridge. It's like a hurricane up here. Rain and wind here on Tabletop. Whiteface, number 6. Muddy day here on Street and Nye for number 7 and 8. Sunny and blue on Haystack. Algonquin, up in the clouds, number 18. Gothics, number 22. Panther, number 38. Allen, number 45. 7:12 a.m. Big Slide, Adirondack, 46er. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. February 22nd, 2020. Only 45 minutes into the day on February 22nd, my alarm clock went off at 12:45 a.m. after only going to sleep around 10 p.m. just a few hours earlier. Today, the gang was preparing for yet another sunrise hike, and we planned to start hiking at 2 a.m. We had an ambitious goal for the morning that would take us up and over 2 mountains in the dark before watching the sunrise on the third peak of the day. So with the sunrise coming up at 6:42 a.m., we had a lot of work ahead of us to get up and over Sawteeth and Pyramid to the summit of Gothics by 6:42 a.m. So today the Lower Great Range was on tap, along with Sawteeth and Pyramid, of course. The Lower Great Range is made up of Gothics, Armstrong, Upper Wolfjaw, and Lower Wolfjaw. And with the popular addition of Sawteeth and Pyramid, this hike would weigh in at just under 17 miles with 5,500 feet of elevation gain. Our plan today was to start with Sawteeth via the Weld Trail, then over Pyramid and onto the Range Trail to Gothics, Armstrong, Upper Wolfjaw, and Lower Wolfjaw, and then down the Wedge Brook Trail to the West River Trail and back to our cars. This 5 high peak, 6 mountain day is a well-sought-after hike in the Adirondacks and boasts some of the best views the 80K has to offer on one of the most exciting range hikes on the East Coast. Another big winter day in the high peaks was underway. Another early morning meant leaving my house in Lake Placid at 1:20 a.m. to get to the St. Hubert parking lot ready to hike at 2 a.m. It was a quiet morning driving there this time, in that direction. I'm actually on this road at this hour pretty often on a Friday night or Saturday morning, depending how you look at it. But I'm usually coming the other direction from New York City, heading home to Lake Placid for the weekend. But since I was off from work this week, I was driving in the opposite direction. I pulled into the St. Hubert parking lot at 1:45 a.m., where Brian was already parked and Kira pulled in just a few minutes after I arrived. And now we wait for young Jonathan, as we all sit in our heated running cars at this hour thinking about how nice it would be to just put the seat back a little bit and go back to sleep for a few hours. Then just after 2 a.m., Jonathan pulled into the parking lot. The 4 of us said our hellos and we left our cars at 2:15 a.m. and started walking up the dirt road towards the trailhead. Past the golf course on our right, with a slight silhouette of Giant towering above in the darkness, and then we made the left between the 2 tennis courts towards the trailhead and signed in for the day. Certainly the first people to sign in today. And now starts the 3-mile walk down the lake road. If you're familiar with the lake road, you know it doesn't need any time devoted to talking about it, other than the fact that we walked in our bare boots over the well-packed road. If you're not familiar, it's simply a long dirt road with lots of trails off of it throughout the 3 miles. Today, however, we were walking all the way to the end to the Ausable River. So down the road we went, and then a little over an hour later, we were at the end. Damn, am I still talking about the lake road? So it's 3:50 in the morning. We made it to the Ausable, about to cross the lake to go over to the Weld Trail, which we're going to take up Sawteeth first. Making good time. Finished the lake road, which was very uneventful. Nothing worth speaking about. About to cross the big wooden bridge. Here we go. We all stopped and grabbed a drink, adjusted our layers, put on our snowshoes, and prepared for the real hike to begin. It was 20 degrees this morning, which is a great winter hiking temperature. Then we walked down the path to the wooden bridge over the mostly frozen Ausable and began our day. We'd be going up the Weld Trail today, which was broken out nicely and was quite easy to follow. This portion of the hike, however, was certainly not foreshadowing what was in store for the day, but we'll get to that. So we hiked up this first trail at a nice, leisurely, comfortable morning pace, often switching up who's leading as we climbed roughly 1,700 feet over this 1.4-mile trail. It was early, as we know, and the wind wasn't bad at all, thankfully. It was shaping up to be a nice day in the mountains as the stars shined bright above us. Nice and clear sky. Not long into this narrow, pine-ridden trail, roughly a quarter mile or so, you'll come to the Rainbow Falls Lookout, which today was of course frozen and covered in snow, but still it's a great waterfall to check out whenever you're on this trail. But remember, stay back from edge. Don't be a dropout. If you've been here, you get it. And if you don't understand, you'll get it when you go there. Thanks to the bright, clear sky and the moonlight and Jonathan's stadium spotlight headlamp that he wears, we were able to enjoy the view of the frozen waterfall. We carried on up the trail, and shortly after this, Jonathan told an excellent spooky story about a guttural yet shrieking scream he once heard in the woods back in Ohio that was so powerful he could feel it in his body. And it made him pretty nervous even talking about it. Needless to say, despite the early morning hours, we were all hiking and enjoying conversations instead of the often silent early morning hiking. We kept climbing the mountain, making our way up this trail, which was about 2 feet wide, nice and packed down snow, like a snow-covered sidewalk, as I often talk about. And at this point, I was leading and Jonathan was directly behind me, and he said, "Okay, count your next 46 steps out loud." So slightly confused, I did, and upon coming to step 46, I said, "Okay, now what?" Jonathan was attempting to be slick and thought he had timed it so the 46th step would make me landing directly at the trail split for Sawteeth, but he was not even close. We were still a good few minutes and probably a couple hundred steps from the junction. Nice try, Jonathan, maybe next time. But not long after, we came out to the real trail junction for Sawteeth at 5:10 a.m., just under 2 hours since leaving our cars. It is 5:10 in the morning. We are now at the trail junction to go over to Sawteeth, half a mile away. Pyramid is 0.6 to our right. Gothics is a mile to our right. We're going to head over to Sawteeth next. I'm pretty tired. My quads are burning. I don't know about the rest of them, but Jonathan's wide awake. Onward. Sawteeth was half a mile to the left, and Pyramid was 0.6 miles to the right, with Gothics 1 mile to the right. Now, just before we landed here, someone mentioned that they remembered the trail from here over to Sawteeth being relatively flat the whole way, as if we were already up to elevation, more or less. And my memory wasn't great, and I thought to myself, cool, that's great. However, that was not quite the case. We also decided to drop pack for this half a mile section since it was the middle of the night and it was a quick out and back. So we layered up in preparation for the wind and started hiking up to Sawteeth. We realized very quickly that not only is it not a flatter stroll, but it has some super steep sections of climbing. Sections that now would foreshadow what our day would soon become. We all broke trail up to Sawteeth, and many of these steep climbs were an enormous pain in the butt. As with every step, the snow would constantly give out under my snowshoe, making every step up these steep sections taking 3 or 4 tries of digging the claws of my snowshoes in, hoping it'll hold my weight, digging the trekking poles into the ground and stepping up and letting my quads and toes do 100% of the work. It was a challenge. It also led to me being a bit behind the rest of the pack, but that's not quite a big deal. We're all going to the same place and it's only half a mile up. But after scratching and clawing my way up this steep, definitely not flat little trail over to Sawteeth, from the Well Junction, I made it onto the summit ledge of Sawteeth at 5:45 a.m., overlooking Pyramid and Gothics lit up by the moonlight bouncing off the white snow on the mountains all around. Sawteeth is the 35th highest peak in the Adirondacks with an elevation of 4,150 feet, peak number 1 of 6 for the day. It is 5:45 in the morning. We are up here on Sawteeth, made it to the first peak of the day. Completely dark. The sun has not even begun to rise, so it is straight up the middle of the night right now. Not too windy, a little windy, but not too windy. You can see Pyramid right in front of me, covered in snow, Gothics as well, which is up in the clouds at the moment. So our plan is to make it over to Pyramid to enjoy the sunrise. 5:50, time to head on over. Jonathan and Kira were standing on the summit as I arrived, and just before I made it up, I passed Brian coming back down into the tree line to change up his layers. The summit was dark and windy today, not too cold, thankfully, And this was the first time I had ever been on a high peak in complete and total darkness, well before first light or any sign of the sun, straight up the middle of the night. It was a pretty cool experience and a super cool vibe. At this point, we could see the summit of Gothics was very much in the clouds, so we decided to call an audible and make our sunrise destination be the top of Pyramid instead. Especially since the sun would be rising an hour from now, and knowing what's entailed to get up Pyramid and how steep it is, perhaps it would be a bit too ambitious to get over to Gothics in time. So Brian and Kira started down Sawteeth first to get moving and to keep warm, while I stayed on the summit a few minutes longer with Jonathan while he took a few more photographs before we started back down. And then a few minutes into this half-mile trip back to the Weld Junction, while climbing down the snow-covered trail, I caught an awkward edge on my snowshoe in the snow and completely wiped out and slid down the side of the trail, grabbing onto a tree to save my life. Hilarious. Fortunately, it was a soft trail and a soft landing. So I stood up, brushed off, of course. I'd fall plenty more times throughout the day. But we carried on. Speaking of butts, we enjoyed some high-quality, high-fun butt sliding down some of the steeper sections getting off Sawteeth, and we quickly met back up with Kira and Brian just before the trail junction where we dropped our packs. At this point, we all ate a snack. For me, it was a buffalo chicken breast sandwich and a delicious bag of peanut butter M&Ms, and then some water with Noon tablets. My go-to trail food. At this point, Jonathan was getting a little nervous about potentially missing the sunrise, so he decided to go ahead of us and cruise like he tends to do. The kid is fast if you've never hiked with him. And Brian, who's also a bit of a trail savage himself, decided to go with Jonathan, and Kira and I took a little extra time, and then a few minutes later we started the 0.6-mile trip up to Pyramid. Or as I call it, the beginning of the hardest few hours of hiking I've ever experienced. Despite being over 4,000 feet elevation, Pyramid isn't technically considered a high peak due to not fitting the criteria the Marshall brothers had for the 46 high peaks. I believe they need at least 300 feet of prominence from a nearby peak, or 300 feet above the connecting col, or be greater than 3/4 of a mile apart. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure someone will let me know, but that's what I remember being told way back when. Granted, I believe this is a theory, and not everyone actually agrees that the Marshall brothers had criteria like this, and some figure they just used the geological maps available to them over 100 years ago, and simply counted the peaks over 4,000 feet on those maps, which of course had mistakes on them. But that's a discussion for another time. Jonathan and Brian, bless their hearts, broke trail the entire way up Pyramid through at least 12 inches of snow everywhere, with some stretches being easily 2 to 3 feet deep. This climb, in my opinion, summer or winter, is the hardest stretch of the hike, which is ironic considering the non-technical high peak is the hardest part of this hike. Perhaps it's Pyramid's revenge for not being considered a high peak. It gains 900 feet elevation over 0.6 miles. So it's steep, and today it was slow going. Kira and I carried on up the trail following in Brian and John's deep, powdery footsteps as we began to climb. It didn't take long for me to think to myself, damn, this is serious snow. Thank God those guys went first. Shortly after the real climbing began, struggling with every single step because the snow never holds and always slides out under my feet, I started feeling something I've never felt before while hiking. Both of my legs started to cramp up. Oh no. If I squeezed my quads, I'd have to quickly stop because the cramps were rough on both of them. I started the day super sore from heavy squatting and heavy deadlifting the day before, which in retrospect was probably a poor training choice the day before a bigger hike like this. But since I've done it many times before, I honestly didn't think much of it. I tried to keep pushing on and kept climbing to see if it would go away, and of course, it wasn't going away. So thankfully, Kira didn't mind stopping, and I quickly housed a banana to get some potassium in me in about 14 seconds. Since potassium aids in cramping muscles, of course. Along with a bunch of Noon water to get some more electrolytes in me. And it's also a good idea to keep some salt packets in your pack as well, because when you're cramping up, oftentimes your body needs salt. So I also ate a salt pack and washed it down with some water. It's not great, but it does the trick. We then carried on up the trail, and I continued to slip and slide everywhere on every damn step. Winter hiking has its glory moments when you make it to the summit in the dead of winter, but winter hiking also has its "this is stupid" moments. And I was currently in a "this is stupid" moment. And I'm not exaggerating when I say every single step up this mountain was a challenge. And many of you who've spent a lot of time out hiking in the winter know exactly